We are going to see the King, soon and very soon. We are going to see the King, soon.
Welcome to Televisit with the Bible, presented by Churches of Christ in the Shoal.
Hallelujah, hallelujah, we're going to see the King.
Good morning again to everybody, and welcome. We are so pleased to have you with us today. All you who are guests honor us, and we appreciate so much that you've chosen to come and meet with us today. It was a Saturday night, and I got home a whole lot later than I usually ever did. I was a teenager, 16, 17. I didn't know the time was going to be important then, so I don't remember for sure. We had moved into the landlord's home place, Mr. Tom White, not my neighbor now, but had been the landlord for us actually over a 9-year period, 3 different houses, 3 different years in each one. But now he'd retired, moved into assisted living, and we lived in the home place. That's the time we had a phone while I was growing up. Long hall, about as long as this aisle down from the back of the hallway, and a little sunroom where Mom and Dad slept, and I was next to the porch up there at the front. Early in the morning, I heard Mom get up and start walking down that hallway, stopping at my door. She said, "All right, boy, get up and tell us about your business." That wasn't the way every morning started. There was a reason for it, because you see, out front there was a strange car. Not my car. Not the car in which I had left. There had been the night before a mechanical breakdown, and that subsequently led to me finally borrowing a car and being home much later. About the only time I ever remember that I came in the house without, as soon as I'd opened the door, we didn't own a key, but when I pushed the door open, I'd hear Dad say, "Boy, is that you?" He didn't say that morning. It was after midnight. And so Mom was the first to wonder, what is going on here? If you were a person who grew up in the 1930s, the 1940s, the 1950s, and then you had somehow pulled a long nap like the famous man did. If you were Rip Van Winkle and you woke up this year from, say, 1965 or 70, your question would be a great deal like Mother's was. What on earth is going on? What's going on here? You'd want to know, because you would find that things are not like they used to be. You expected them to be, and they are not seemingly in the ordinary whatsoever as related to that point in time. You see, on that Saturday night back in East Texas, there had been a mechanical breakdown. In our environment, in our culture, there's been a moral breakdown. And because of that, adjustments have been made that we didn't expect to make. There have been accommodations that have been made. They may or may not be appropriate, but they are changes. And change now is lifted up as though it were God. And politicians run on the philosophy of, I'm going to change this world. And if they meant they were going to change it in a way that would be destructive, they've been quite successful, in my opinion. For things are out of sync, and there is so much missing that needs to be present in the culture. We who are in the family of God, we who are trying to be the children of God with the face that we ought to have in this culture, behaving as we ought to, and effecting as much change in the culture for good as we possibly can, find ourselves frustrated wondering just what is our role? What are we supposed to be doing now? And how do we handle it? What's missing? What changed? Did we look away so long that it happened right under our nose? Where do we go from here? I suggest that we begin in Philippians chapter 2. Philippians chapter 2, there are 3 verses that I would refer us to, verses 12, 13, 14, following. Therefore, my beloved brethren, as you've always obeyed, so now, not only as in my presence, but much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who works within you both to will and to do his good purpose. Do all things without grumbling or questioning. And now listen, that you may be blameless and innocent, the children of God without blemish, in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world, holding fast to the word of life, so that in the day of Christ I may be proud that I did not run in vain in laboring for you. Yes, there's a way. But the Apostle Paul is acknowledging we live in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation. This English Standard Version says twisted generation. I believe King James Version uses the word crooked. It is crooked to the point that it almost is broken as we see it today. Nevertheless, when we're looking for what is our role, it is to continue to be who we're supposed to be, doing what we're supposed to do for the sake and for the cause of God. If we're looking for the definition of what do we do, that's it. But the how-to is another matter. And we look not only for what we are to do, ought to do, in fact must do, but we look also for how can we cause that to be accomplished. We need to understand the depth of the battle in which we find ourselves. I encourage you to flip back just a page or two to Ephesians chapter 6. In that passage in Ephesians chapter 6, the Apostle Paul speaks of this same kind of thing. He says in verse 10 and following, finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the whole armor of God that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. For we are not wrestling against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in heavenly places. When you try to grasp all those descriptions, whenever he is trying to convey to the first century church, and incidentally to the 21st century church as well, he uses terminology that tries to describe that we are in a warfare, that we're in a serious warfare, that we are not at war with other people, we are at war with error, we're at war with the forces of evil, we are at war with those who represent the devil and the devil himself, not just with earthly power, but we are at war with spiritual matters and with those who are even in heavenly places. It is a serious war in which we find ourselves engaged, because the outcome of this battle, these battles, will determine the future, not only of this country, but it will determine to a large degree the future and the eternal home, the place we will spend eternity But perhaps more important to us, it may well determine the question of where our children and our grandchildren will spend eternity as well. We are at a critical, pivotal, crucial point in this battle. For I've lived long enough to see the difference, and I promise you that unlike Rip Van Winkle, I didn't sleepwalk through it. I watched it. I saw it, and for my whole life, I can say, almost my whole life, what I have done is preach. Preach the gospel truth. Preach and endorse and encourage morality in a culture where morality has become more and more and more scarce for my whole life. I fought a good fight, I believe. I can say with the Apostle Paul, I have kept the faith. I do believe that henceforth there's laid up for me a crown of righteousness, and not for me only, but for all those who love the Lord and His appearing. But I have not won this battle. And I've not fought it alone. There have been thousands of other gospel preachers who fought alongside me. There have been thousands and thousands of Christian people in this country who also have fought for right and continue to. And many would indeed give their very life if they knew that it could make the difference. But in spite of all of that, it has engulfed us, it has overrun us, it has flooded us, it has consumed us. And you may find someone preaching positively in some pulpit somewhere and indicating that we don't have a problem, but I don't know who that is and I don't know where it is, but I can tell you one thing, he is lying. The Word said the time will come when they will say peace, peace, when there is no peace. Folks, we don't have peace. We have war. We've got things going on that we would never have dreamed would occur. I still remember the Columbine shooting. I know where Betty and I were. We were in Russellville when we first heard a gospel meeting was beginning, and we were attending, and the announcement came, and we were overwhelmed. I wrote a pamphlet about school violence. School violence was at that point an unusual occurrence. And now it's become so commonplace that it gets little attention. And we've had the shooting in the theater not so far from Columbine, not so long ago. The trial outcome not yet determined. And now in the past 7 days, we've seen what seems to be surely the climax of the insult to injury that exists. When someone looked 16, but said to be 21, walks into a place of worship, and good, quiet, humble people, attested by their obituaries, are shot and killed for no reason apparently other than just they were black. If you think we aren't messed up, you haven't read the news, you haven't turned on the TV, and you're not in tune. You must be asleep. When that sort of thing can happen, and it actually doesn't get all that much attention still, because we are so messed up. We have had a moral train wreck, and it didn't happen suddenly, but progressively ever since the early 1960s. You say, how, why, what happened? Folks, we stopped some important things. We stopped valuing human life. We stopped it when we decided a baby could be killed in the mother's womb and there would be no consequence of it. We stopped caring then. We have killed, I suppose, more than 1 million without giving them a chance to live since then. And it is supported by our lawmakers. It is supported by our leaders. It is supported by some churches. You tell me we're not in trouble? When churches get to where they don't support the value of a baby, innocent baby's life, and speak of the mother's rights, we've reached a low ebb when it comes to morality. Have you noticed the Sunday newspaper doesn't have very many pictures of brides anymore? There used to be 10, 20 in a given Sunday. Now there might be 3. There might not be any. Because not that many people are bothering to marry. In some urban cities, there are more people who live together, cohabitate, give birth to babies or not, without the benefit of marriage than there are who are married. The birth rate may have dropped. Fornication has not. We provided pills and other means whereby people can participate in those activities without the consequence, they call it, of the possibility of pregnancy. We've decided that's all okay. And young people go off to college. They come home and they bring their live-in with them home, and mom and dad say, we just don't know what to do. We just let them share a bedroom there too. God forbid that we would be so morally depraved that we would risk our child's soul with our own endorsement. How'd that all happen? Folks, we stopped respecting authority. We stopped respecting the authority of God, of the officials who are elected, of the police. How'd you like to be a policeman these days? It's a war zone every time he or she gets up and goes to work. It ought not to be. And school teachers, principals, a battle zone for them often as well. The emotional stress is overwhelming when it ought to be a pleasure. What on earth ought to give somebody greater satisfaction as employment than to be able to work with children, young people, and shape them and point them in the right direction, and then see them go off that way and come back and contribute to society? What ought to be more pleasure? And yet, the anxiety and the stress and the uncertainty of it. You see, they quit letting teachers teach moral values. They quit letting them teach that anything is wrong. 30 years ago, approximately, an agenda was developed designed to convince children that no matter what kind of household people came from, they ought to accept them and the relationship that exists in the household. And now some people wonder that our young people have grown up assuming homosexuality to be a normal course, when our taxpayer dollars were used to indoctrinate and brainwash them to that effect. I haven't seen anybody get much excited about it, folks. In fact, those who do speak out often are called lunatics. They are spoken of as being people who are deranged, out of touch. And Satan has used intimidation to lead people to stay quiet. Been effective. I congratulate him. That's a good one. Because when people are ashamed and afraid to say anything, whenever they see sin all around them and they hear error expressed by their friends and their neighbors, and they just don't want to be humiliated by even saying they believe in the Bible or believe in God, or they go to church and they practice morality, if Satan can keep us gagged in those situations, if he can gag the pulpit, if he can get to where, and he's there, that it would be illegal for me to preach against some sins, God forbid that we would have quietly allowed it to occur. What's going on here? We have shot ourselves in the heart by not speaking up. We have failed in teaching the basic fundamental principles, not only of Christianity, but of any system related to God. Because you see, the Judaistic system involved the teaching of love for your neighbor. In fact, in Matthew chapter 22, when the Pharisees sent somebody to ask Jesus, what is the first and great commandment? Jesus said the first one is love. It's love God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. Folks, if people did that, we wouldn't have any trouble. If people loved God with all their heart, all their soul, and all their mind, they wouldn't disobey Him. They wouldn't displease Him. They wouldn't go against Him. They'd keep His commands. But Jesus volunteered. The second He said is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. We're not doing that. Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers. They'll be called the sons of God. We don't have peacemakers. Jesus said, as you would that men do unto you, do you likewise unto them. We haven't communicated that. When people want to hurt other people, kill other people, rob, steal, abuse, that's not that. We haven't got that communicated. When that boy walked in that church house and killed people because they're black, what a travesty. Because we failed to teach him. You love your neighbor, whoever he is. You don't hate him because he's black. You don't hate him because he's white. You don't hate him because he's Hispanic. You don't hate him because he lives in the ghetto or he lives in a rich palace somewhere. You don't hate him. It's love. And Paul said, when it's all said and done, there's just three things that really are going to shake out: faith, hope, and love. The greatest of these is love. John said in 1 John 4, if any man says, I love God, and he doesn't love his brother, he's a liar. He just doesn't get it. We haven't taught love enough. Maybe we haven't loved enough ourselves. We haven't loved God, His authority, His word, the moral system that He's taught, and if we loved Him, we'd love each other. Because that moral system is just treating other people like they ought to be treated. Respecting people like they ought to be respected. And if we had that taken care of, the moral system would work. The school system would work. churches wouldn't fight. They might differ on doctrine, but they wouldn't fight. They'd be kind and loving and gentle. All this business they give us about judgmental, and that wouldn't exist either, because love does not produce those kinds of things. If I try to define what's at the core of it all, I think there's no greater absence than the teaching of love. But closely related to that has to be the moral system. And closely related to that has to be the failure to recognize that God is in authority. He knows best. And what He says is the best system for man and the only one that ultimately will work. What's happening here? Man has decided that he's in charge. Man has decided he knows best. Man has decided, I don't need God. As early as 1962, they proclaimed Him dead. And in the lives and in the minds of a lot of people today, He is. Or He might as well be, because they're not responding. We must hold Him up. We must exemplify. And we must testify that God is, and He's still in control. And if we don't, we can just read the history books, and they'll tell us what to expect. They will tell you. What's going on here? We are sowing to the wind and reaping the whirlwind. We are, as my dad would have said, on a slick slide to hell. As a nation, as a culture, as a people, until we repent. And God said, if my people, who are called by my name, will repent of their sins, if they will call on me, if they will turn to me, I will hear their prayer, and I will heal their nation. God, heal our nation now, we ask.
Soon and very soon, we are going to see the King. Soon and very
Thank you for watching Televisit with the Bible, presented by Churches of Christ in the Shoals. Join us again next week at the same time for Televisit with the Bible.
soon.